Hi everyone. One of my finishes for March has been Those Who Run in the Sky by Aviaq Johnston. And this is an Inuit novel that I read with my son, Elliot. And I thought it was wonderful. So this is a coming of age story, and also a quest story. So Peturnik is our main character. He is the hunter, young up-and-coming hunter of his village. He has great instincts for hunting. And he also has this kind of foreboding around him that his elders are noticing. And it becomes revealed about a quarter way into the book that he is going to be the next shaman of the tribe. And so he then is pulled off into his journey of rite of passage where he becomes the shaman. And so you go with him through his trials and tribulations in the spirit world, and he takes you on that journey with him, and you watch him mature and learn and grow. And you also learn a lot about Inuit culture, Inuit familial structure, and Inuit stories and myths and legends. And so it's really, really wonderful. I would highly recommend. And there is a part 2, which I also own, and which I plan to read at some point in the future with Elliot. So please check this out if you're interested in learning more about Inuit culture and want to go on a really great and enriching story in the Arctic. Hi everyone. I finished a Pilgrim in Ireland, A Quest for Home by Frances Greenslade last night. This is a memoir, a travel memoir, and Frances Greenslade is a writer who's lived all over Canada, born in Ontario. Her family lineage is Irish on both sides of her family. And so she was raised Irish Catholic, and she kind of goes on a quest to kind of search for her roots, and takes a trip to Ireland by herself for 5 weeks. So this book, I just want to check what year it was published. It was published in 2002. So it definitely has like a late 90s kind of vibe in terms of the mode of travel, and I find that really interesting when you're reading travel memoir, when you realize that, you know, people didn't have smartphones, they weren't Instagramming, they weren't doing all these things that people do now when they travel. So that was one interesting part. For me, there were a couple things in here that I marked, a few quotes in terms of my own research around being a descendant of a settler in another land, which is not the land where your people originate from. And that's kind of what I was looking for in here. And she talked about that a bit, but it was not quite as extensively talked about as I was hoping. And she also relays a lot of other travel stories. So you'll be talking about a place in Ireland that she's visiting, and then you'll kind of go back in time to another trip that she had where she had a related experience, which was fine, but it wasn't really as focused as I was hoping. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought that I always love learning more about a place through someone else's travels there, and so that was really interesting. And I think she was also really exploring Catholicism and the remnants of Catholicism, both in Ontario where she grew up and also in Ireland, and how those things are kind of different, and the way that spirituality and religion have evolved here in Canada is different from the way the people who left Ireland were raised in it. So there's just these differences in the way that religion is integrated into life in Ireland compared to the way it has evolved here. So there is some historical aspects that she goes into, not a lot of mythological and folklore, but a little bit. And you kind of get that sense as well of like of a traveler. She's, a woman in her 30s traveling alone, staying in hostels, on a budget. So, you get a bit of that type of experience as well. So, yeah, overall, I'm glad I read it. And yeah, I will check in again when I finish another one. Hey everyone. Okay, so I actually have 2 books to wrap up today because I forgot about wrapping up one of them when I finished it a few days ago. So How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell was my audiobook for March, and I can't even tell you, this book was like an extreme for me because the first chapter I welled up with tears several times because I felt it was speaking to me in such a direct way. And then in other chapters I was bored. So I feel it was a good book. I think that she's talking about what she calls the attention economy and how social media plays into this and how our attention has been commandeered by the large corporations that run these social media platforms. She talks about resisting that. She talks about, creating real relationships with nature and with other people. And I think those are all important and really, timely points that we all need to think about. And she also talked a lot about birds because she's fascinated by birds, and she's also an artist. So, I connected with her on many levels in this book. But then she went into some philosophical things. And for me, I get very bored by philosophy. I understand how it related to what she was talking about and the bigger ideas, but I prefer if things like this, so books about like current social issues and issues affecting us at our time, I prefer if they're more personal and less philosophical. I just get bored. So it was a bit of a mixed bag because I really enjoyed her personal anecdotes and talking about her own experiences, and then also relating those to, modern day people talking about the attention economy. But then I got very bored when she went and started, referencing, Greek philosophers and things like that, which to me is just, I know she's trying to make this universal statement about time and humanity, but I'm just tired of Greek interpretations of life, and it just doesn't float my boat. So it was a bit of a mixed bag for me in that way, the book. And then I just finished Kathe Kollwitz's The Art of Compassion. This is actually a catalog that was produced for an art exhibition of her work in Ontario, the Ontario Art Gallery. And I featured this book on my Instagram for my art book feature of March. Kathe Kollwitz was a German artist. Early 20th century was when her work really hit the foreground. She was documenting the plight of the poor, of the working class, of mothers, and she was a socialist and was pushing for social change through her work. Very, very powerful artist. And obviously I was thinking about her reflections on war because she lived through both. Well, she died right at the end of World War II. So she lived through some very traumatic times, lost her own son in the First World War. And so she came to mind because of what's going on in Ukraine, and I wanted to read more about her work. So this is the book, and it has 3 different essays about her and her work in here, along with images of the work. So it's a pretty great book. All right, so I will check in again. It's not quite the end of the month. I have one more book that I will be finishing before the end of March that I can check in about. And all the other books I read during March were for the BookTube Prize, so those results will be coming out in separate vlogs. Okay, I'll check in later. Hey everybody, I am here to, I have a thread on me, to wrap up my March reading for you. It is the 29th today. So I've started a couple books, but I'm not going to finish anything else in March. So I'm just going to tell you about What Willow Says by Lynn, which was kind of my maybe on my March TBR because I wasn't sure if I would have time and get it read, but I did. This is an Irish novel, an Irish author, and it was published in 2021, so it's relatively new. Lynn is a member of the deaf community, so this is an Own Voices book. And it is a relationship between a grandmother and her granddaughter. The granddaughter's mother, dies, and you don't really know the details. This book is very sparse in terms of details. So if that bothers you, if you need a lot of details, then I don't know if you will get along with this. So the grandmother has not fully learned sign language, but she and her granddaughter communicate in a very fluid and intuitive way, I would say. And the granddaughter is very much interested in what the trees say, and so the title comes from the willows that are in their backyard. And so the grandmother is an artist who documents trees in her neighborhood, and so they talk about trees a lot. There's a lot of really great, I would say, nice nature writing in here, but not in a very sweeping, grand way. It's a quieter neighborhood type of nature way, which I found, quite lovely. And there's also an undercurrent through the story of pending loss, and there's a kind of past loss that is discussed, and then this future loss that is coming. And so there's a level of melancholy that kind of flows through the whole story as well. So there were parts of this that I really liked, and I think that there were glimmers of a very beautiful, poignant way of writing in here. But for me, it was a little bit too sparse. I need a little bit more detail, a little bit more development in terms of the relationships and who the people are that I'm learning about. And I would have preferred a bit more of just more depth to the characters. Otherwise, I think the story was quite lovely. I'm trying to remember, but I think this is probably the first time I've read a book featuring a deaf character. And so I thought that was very interesting, and I liked the idea of this granddaughter and her personality and how she navigated the world, in one way with her grandmother and then another way with the rest of her community. It had a very modern sense of place in terms of featuring Ireland in this very normal, suburban, almost way. And then there's also an element of folklore that is worked in. So the grandmother is trying to give granddaughter a sense of her Irish heritage, and so in that she tells stories, the different stories of goddesses and myths and legends that occur in Irish folklore. So there's also that undercurrent in each section. But it's very much, I think, a book about normal passing of time and the way that we live our lives and the choices we make, and how the days proceed. So there's not a lot that happens. It doesn't have a lot of plot. So if you don't like a book that doesn't have a lot of plot, then I wouldn't recommend it to you. It's a novella. It's short, so you don't really miss the plot that much. Although I am not a reader that needs a ton of plot anyway. So take that with a grain of salt and consider reading it if you like those things I've just described. So overall, my reading in March was fine. I got all my Book 2 prize reading done, which is exciting. And I think that the few books that I read besides the Book 2 prize books were fairly good. And I read 2 books off my shelves, which is great because I wanted to make sure that I read at least 1 book off my shelf each month this year to try to keep up with my buying. Not that I buy a ton of books. You don't see a lot of book hauls on this channel, but I still have a lot of books that I haven't read, and so I want to make sure that I'm reading them at a relatively steady pace. So that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back again soon with more reading content, and if you're interested in learning about the Book 2 prize books that I have read in March, all the vlogs and the ranking videos will be linked down below. And thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again soon.